1996 cold case disappearance of Kristin Smart.
Kristin Smart.
Kristin Smart.
Kristin Smart.
Missing Cal Poly student Kristin Smart.
May 25th, 1996. California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, California. Crystal Calvin wakes up to discover that her roommate does not appear to have returned home from a party the night before. Feeling uneasy about the situation, Crystal reaches out to the campus police, but because it's a holiday weekend, they prove less than helpful. They assured Crystal that it was normal for students to take impromptu mini vacations around the holidays, and that her roommate would likely return before classes resumed that week. But she never did. She was not formally declared a missing person until days after that initial phone call had been made. Because of this, police lost the most crucial time frame of their investigation, the first 72 hours. For 25 years, with no luck, police have worked to bring their prime suspect to justice, but the evidence just doesn't seem to be there. She was 19 years old with an incredibly bright future ahead of her, but rather than achieving her dreams, she vanished without a trace. This is the Kristin Smart story. Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, hi, my name is Jessica and welcome to my channel where I explore new true crime cases each week. If you have an interest in true crime like me and you'd like to join me back here each week, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. Today's case is my first request from one of you guys, so I quickly want to say thank you to TheRealMaddz for requesting this one. If you ever have a case request for me, please feel free to leave it down below. Obviously, I love covering cases that I'm interested in, but I want to give the people what they want. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get into today's case. Kristin Denise Smart was born on February 20th, 1977 in Augsburg, Germany to her parents Stan and Denise, who at this time were working as teachers for the children of overseas military families. Although she was born in Germany, Kristin was primarily raised in Stockton, California. She was the oldest of 3 children, followed by her brother Matt and then her sister Lindsay. The Smart family was very, very close. Kristin in particular is remembered as being very loving and affectionate towards her parents as well as her siblings, always acting as kind of a mediator in their childhood spats. She was tall, tan, and blonde with a smile that could light up a room. She was pretty much exactly what you'd imagine if you heard the words California surfer girl. Kristin was always super adventurous, and because of this, she did get to experience a lot in her short life. She spent the summer before her sophomore year of high school in London, the summer before her junior year in Venezuela as an exchange student, the summer before her senior year riding bikes in the honors program at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the summer before she started college as a lifeguard and camp counselor in Hawaii, so she was a pretty busy girl. She graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton, California in 1995 with plans to attend California Polytechnic State University as a communications major in the fall. Cal Poly is located in San Luis Obispo, California, which is about 200 miles north of Los Angeles. After arriving at Cal Poly, Kristin and her roommate Crystal settled into their dorm room in Muir Hall. And just 4 minutes up the road from Muir Hall, in Santa Lucia Hall, roomed another player in our story, a young man named Paul Flores. Paul Ruben Flores was born on October 22nd, 1976, to his parents Ruben and Susan. Paul was a food science major at Cal Poly, however, that was hardly what he was known for around campus. Unfortunately for Paul, he was working on a very different reputation. Often referred to as Scary Paul, he was becoming most known around campus for his nasty behavior towards the female students. In December of 1995, he was actually picked up by San Luis Obispo police after a fellow student caught him on the balcony of her off-campus apartment. She assumed he was either peeping in her windows or trying to break in. Regardless of why he was there, she was not okay with it and she called the cops. His exact intentions were never made clear, but he was apprehended by the police that day. Unfortunately, though, rather than charge him for these indiscretions, despite the fact that he was assumed to be intoxicated and clearly a weirdo, police let him off with a warning and suggested that he leave the premises and not return. They also decided not to alert the campus police or the school of what had happened. Paul was later suspected of harassing the girl and her roommates again by phone in March of 1996. They filed a report about this as well, but again, nothing was done. In summation, Paul is running amok around campus, being creepy, and nobody's doing a damn thing about it. Which brings us to Friday, May 24th, 1996, the start of the 3-day Memorial Day weekend. As I mentioned earlier, Kristin was incredibly close with her family, and she made a point of calling her parents every Sunday night. However, this week she instead reached out to them on Friday, but no one answered, so she left a voicemail letting them know that she had some good news to share with them and that she would reach back out to them the following day. Later that same night, Kristin and a few friends left their dorms in search of a party. Kristin mentioned having heard about a birthday party she wouldn't mind attending and suggested that she and her friends stop by there. The party was hosted by the Kappa Chi fraternity at 135 Crandall Way. Her friends, on the other hand, weren't really super into the idea, so they actually ended up dropping her off a couple blocks from the party. One of her friends later recalled that Kristin seemed kind of disappointed and annoyed that no one would go with her, and I have to say I get it because I don't really think that girlfriends should allow each other to go places like that alone. To clarify, I don't think it's fair that women have to disaster plan and travel in packs the way that we're taught to, but I do think it's the safest reality. Where there is a woman alone and vulnerable, there is a high probability that someone will try to take advantage of the situation. That being said, there is no one to blame for what happened to Kristin other than whoever truly harmed her. What happened isn't her fault. She is not to blame for going to a party by herself. And it's not her friend's fault. They are not to blame for dropping her off there. I'm merely saying that if someone she had trusted had gone with her that night, it likely would have changed the outcome of the evening, but I digress. This is where accounts of the evening start to get extremely contradictory. Some people who saw Kristin at the party reported that she was just turning the absolute fuck up, chugging vodka, getting hammered. And some people who saw Kristin at the party reported that she wasn't drinking at all. Regardless of which scenario is true, her blood alcohol content or lack thereof does not excuse or justify whatever happened to her when she left the party that night. According to fellow students who also attended the party, Kristin left the party around 1:30 a.m. and ended up lying down in the front yard of a neighboring home. Around 2 a.m., the party started breaking up and two students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis, were leaving together. And I don't mean like leaving together. I mean like Cheryl couldn't find her friends, so Tim offered to walk her part of the way home. As they were leaving, Cheryl noticed Kristin lying in the grass, and although they weren't close friends, Cheryl knew who she was. Kristin was in shorts and a t-shirt, and it was starting to get cold, and Cheryl felt bad. So she helped Kristin up, and the three started back to campus. But the trio was really getting nowhere fast because although Kristin was able to walk by herself, she seemed to need some help and some support in order to keep from staggering. Then, as luck would have it, after just a couple of steps, another student ran up from behind them and offered to help get Kristin back to her dorm. This student was Paul Flores. Yep. Scary Paul. Kristin began leaning on Paul for support, and the four of them headed off, cutting behind Cal Poly's Recreation Center to Perimeter Road. Once they got to Perimeter Road, Tim actually headed off to his car, which was parked nearby, and left Cheryl and Paul to continue with Kristin. While the three were walking, Paul and Kristin would stop pretty frequently, and when Cheryl would notice they were falling behind, Paul would tell her to just go ahead without them and that he would make sure Kristin got home. But Cheryl thought the whole thing was weird, and she kind of got a bad vibe, so each time they'd stop, she'd decline his offer and wait for them to catch up. Despite this, Paul tried multiple times throughout the duration of their walk to get Cheryl to leave him and Kristin. And again, she thought this was really weird. But even though Paul was being a weirdo, once they got to the intersection of Perimeter Road and Grand Avenue, it came time for the group to split up. Cheryl's dorm room was in Sierra Madre Hall, which was down Grand Avenue. And as we established earlier, Paul lived in Santa Lucia Hall, which was just a couple of minutes away from where Kristin lived in Muir Hall. Paul assured Cheryl that he would get Kristin home safely, and just as she was about to take off, Paul asked her for a goodnight kiss. What? I assume I don't need to clarify this, but in case I do, Cheryl said hell nah, and then also denied his request for a hug before she went on her happy little merry way. As Cheryl left them, Paul and Kristin headed up Perimeter Road to their respective dorms. This is where any definitive knowledge of the events of the evening ends. The only thing that we know for sure is that Kristin never made it back to her dorm room that night. And when her roommate Crystal woke up and saw that she hadn't been home and that her wallet, keys, and personal items were still there, she started to worry. She reached out to campus police, and campus police, dropped the fucking ball entirely. They told Crystal that Kristin would likely return home soon and that they could not waste their time with a missing persons report for every student that took an impromptu vacation over a holiday weekend. Truly excellent work, guys. I feel comfortable criticizing them because Crystal told them that it was not like Kristin to do something like that. And at this point, the clock is already ticking. According to criminology experts, the first 72 hours after a person goes missing are the most important. Within those first 72 hours, any evidence has the most integrity, potential witnesses' memories are the most clear, and most importantly, the victim is more likely to still be alive. But all of these factors kind of start to fall apart with each passing hour. And unfortunately, campus police were wrong, and Kristin did not return home. Mind you, at this point, her parents were also kind of confused. Remember, Kristin had promised to call them Saturday to share some really good news with them, but they never heard from her, which they also kind of excused due to the holiday weekend. They figured maybe she got her days mixed up, and they didn't really allow it to be a cause for concern. They didn't become concerned at all until a few days later. When Kristin failed to return before classes resumed, the Cal Poly campus police were contacted again. This time, they decided to at least do something. So they reached out to Stan and Denise to find out if maybe Kristin had come home for a few days. And this phone call was the first time that Kristin Smart's parents heard anything about the fact that their daughter was missing. After learning of his daughter's disappearance, Kristin's dad took a couple of days off work and without hesitation headed out to the campus. He met with campus police right away, but they didn't really seem to have any information that they were willing or able to share with him. Stan immediately felt as if campus police were in way over their heads with his daughter's case, that they were not properly trained and that they were grossly underqualified to handle something of this magnitude, which, he wasn't wrong. On Tuesday, May 28th, under the assumption that they'd be better equipped to handle the case, the Smarts attempted to file a missing persons report with the San Luis Obispo Police Department. But they were denied and told that it was too soon. I don't know if this really actually used to be like a hard, fast rule, but nowadays, you most certainly do not have to wait some arbitrary designated amount of time before you can file a missing persons report. Some police departments will request that you wait a couple of days, but honestly, what kind of oxymoron is that? The first 72 hours of a missing persons case are the most crucial, but please don't make us start looking yet. So here they are, 72 hours into Kristin being missing, and they're still being denied the start of a formal investigation. Dumb. Luckily, not everyone wanted to sit around and do nothing. One of Kristin's good friends, Margarita Campos, started her own search for Kristin, as well as began putting flyers up all over campus. As word started to spread that Kristin was missing, news got back to Cheryl Anderson. And when she heard about it, she allegedly said that she had a gut feeling that Paul murdered Kristin. Despite this, and despite the fact that a young girl had literally vanished, it took campus police almost an entire week to start asking around and find out that Tim Davis, Cheryl Anderson, and Paul Flores had been seen leaving the party with Kristin. They called the three in for questioning, which resulted in the knowledge that Paul Flores had been the last person to see Kristin before her disappearance. And what was strange about Paul's interview was that he showed up with a black eye and several scratches. I don't know, maybe he'd been in an altercation recently. Campus police took this information into consideration before deciding that there was no indication of foul play in Kristin's disappearance. You want to know what I think? Hopefully, because I'm going to tell you anyway. I don't think campus police were stupid. I mean, I do, but hear me out. I think once they realized they had really fucked up in the beginning, they became more concerned with covering their own asses than they ever were with finding Kristin. I mean, they literally allowed cleaning crews to sanitize Paul's dorm before it ever got searched. It's inconceivable the amount of evidence that they probably lost due to this oversight. I'd be hard-pressed to believe it was not a whole bunch. It took almost a month for campus police to not only realize that the case was not going to quietly disappear, but that they were also just so incredibly way out of their league. They were sitting between a rock and a hard place, and they knew it. So they made the decision to pass the case off to the San Luis Obispo district attorney, which in my opinion seems like they skipped a couple of steps, but I guess whatever gets the case out of their hands is a step in the right direction. The DA began by looking over the initial interview transcripts and actually took note of and found it odd that people around campus reported Paul's black eye had appeared the day after Kristin went missing. Y'all, Paul has never been able to keep his story straight about how he got this goddamn goddamn black eye. First, he said he just woke up with it. Then he said his friend gave it to him during a basketball game, but then that friend was like, I most certainly did not give him that black eye. Then he said he had hit his eye on his steering wheel while trying to adjust his car radio. Do you know how much force one would have to swing their head down with in order to get a black eye just from bumping into the steering wheel? I mean, I don't know the exact figures, but I'd have to assume it's more force than one generally exerts when going like this. Paul's first story of how his walk with Kristin ended was that he watched her walk up the path to her dorm room before he walked to his. However, supposedly he gave his roommate a very, very, very different story. Apparently, when his roommate got home and heard what was going on, he joked with Paul about Kristin's disappearance. Hilarious, right? He made jokes with Paul like, haha, so dude, what did you do with her? And at one point, Paul joked back, I killed her and brought her back to my mom's. She's still there. What's a little coincidental, I guess I'll say, is that Paul's mother had concrete poured behind her property on East Branch Street in Arroyo Grande, California, 2 days after Kristin disappeared. If you haven't seen my video on Abraham Shakespeare and Dee Dee Moore, which I will link up here if you haven't, you may not be feeling a tremendous sense of deja vu. But if you did see that video, you know as well as I do what people seem to be hiding under freshly poured concrete. With suspicion surrounding him and hoping to put it all to rest, Paul agreed to take a polygraph test. However, when it would come time to actually take part, he kept dodging it, rescheduling it, and putting it off. He pulled this shit for so long that eventually investigators just picked him up in a no time like the present sort of scenario. Once at the Arroyo Grande police station, Paul declined to take the polygraph but did agree to submit to another interview. And at one point, this interview kind of seemed to be heading in the direction of a confession. Paul was distressed and visibly upset, but instead of a confession, Paul issued a challenge. If you're so smart, then tell me where the body is. And on that note, he got up and left the interview. And here we are, just shy of 25 years later, and Kristin Smart's body has yet to be recovered. Even without a body, there has been a ton of evidence to make Paul look suspicious. At one point, cadaver dogs were brought into Cal Poly in order to search the areas in question. Mind you, cadaver dogs are trained to near 100% accuracy when it comes to detecting human decomposition. Their noses are so sensitive that they can detect the smell of decomposition through water or through concrete, which is why even after the dorm had been cleaned and sanitized and Paul and his roommate had moved out, every single dog that came through Santa Lucia Hall alerted at Paul's dorm room. And this isn't like, okay guys, let me know if they alert at room 128. The dog handlers aren't even told where specifically to look. They're just given a general area. So the dogs weren't led to Paul's door and then seemed to alert. The dogs led the handlers to Paul's door and then alerted to the scent. Each dog alerted to the same 3 areas of the room: the edge of Paul's bed, the trash can, and the telephone. Because of this, police were fairly certain that at one point either a dead body had been in that room or someone who had handled a dead body had been in that room. But unfortunately, because the room had been cleaned and sanitized, there was no other evidence that they were able to collect from the scene. So they widened their search to include Paul's parents' properties. The first search, the search of Paul's father's house, took place in July of 1996. They chose to search this property first because it was where Paul would spend most of his time off campus. Now, it's been speculated that Ruben had a close relationship with the police department and was tipped off in advance about the search. Obviously, I can't say if that's true or not, but people think it. I can say that their search didn't yield much of anything. Just some newspaper clippings about Kristin's disappearance that were hidden under a bed. And while that's weird and suspicious, it's not illegal or an undeniable sign of guilt. And they didn't really try that hard to find anything beyond that. They didn't search the vehicles, they didn't use cadaver dogs, they kind of just looked around, asked a couple of questions, and left. They have searched Paul's mother's property at 529 East Branch Street multiple times. Once in 96, once in 2000, and once in 2007. In 2014, they searched it again, this time with a cadaver dog. His name was Buster. And old Buster alerted to decomposition in the back left corner of the property. Although that sounds like great news, it turned out to be indifferent, really. The sheriff totally disregarded this information on the grounds that Buster wasn't a certified cadaver dog. Which, like, first of all, how dare you disrespect Buster like that? And second of all, that wasn't even true. Buster was retired because his owner was retired from the police force, but prior to retiring, Buster had been a fully trained and fully certified cadaver dog. What it's assumed that this actually boils down to is that if they dig up that property and they don't find Kristin's body, someone is going to be out a lot of money to patch it all back up, and it ain't gonna be the Flores family. So no one wants to be the one to make the call for fear that they're not going to find anything. In my opinion, this is completely unacceptable. A cadaver dog has alerted on this property, which belongs to the mother of your prime suspect, not to mention the fact that soil samples that had been taken from the property tested positive for human-specific chemicals. So what's the deal, people? Let's talk about the earring. This damn earring. A few weeks after Kristin's disappearance, Mary Lassiter, who began renting the East Branch Street property from Susan Flores, gave police a turquoise earring that she had found in the driveway. The earring appeared to have what may have been dried blood on it, so it was supposedly bagged as evidence. What's inexplicable, though, is that no one from the police department told Kristin's parents about this earring. Like, why? Her parents didn't hear anything about the earring until Mary saw them in court and asked them if the earring had been Kristin's. And Stan and Denise are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Shocked that they didn't know about it, Mary described it to them. And Denise right away was like, that kind of sounds like Kristin's favorite pair of earrings, which were never found. Because they were never found, they were assumed to be the earrings that she was wearing the night she disappeared. And one of them had been found at Susan Flores' property, where Buster the cadaver dog later alerted to human decomposition. And the soil tested positive for human-specific chemicals. And the police refused to excavate. Do you see where I'm going with this? Back to the earring. Naturally, Kristin's parents wanted to see this earring so they could determine if it was in fact the earring they thought it was. They asked if they could see it, and after getting nothing but the runaround and a bunch of excuses, the sheriff's office finally broke down and told them that the earring had been misplaced. They misplaced the only piece of tangible evidence that could connect Kristin Smart to the East Branch Street property. Aside from, her actual body, which is likely buried there. In addition to the earring, Mary Lassiter also took other information to police. She told them about specks of what she believed to be blood on the shower curtain and shower walls. And she told them about a beeping sound that she heard around 4:20 a.m. every morning outside her bedroom window. The significance of this being that Kristin reportedly had a watch alarm set to go off around this exact time every morning. And Mary Lassiter isn't the only person who saw some things that seemed pretty suspicious. Years later, an eyewitness came forward with reports that he saw Paul and another person digging behind that house late one night right around the time of Kristin's disappearance. Wonder what that hole was meant for. The Smarts are fed up, and rightfully so. It truly started to seem as though authorities were doing everything in their power to not solve their daughter's case. And they weren't here for it. They wanted justice, one way or another. So on November 26th, 1996, the Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Paul Flores. But by this time, Paul refused to even discuss the fact that he'd been at that party. His war cry throughout the lawsuit became, quote, "On the advice of my attorney, I refuse to answer that question based on the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution," unquote. Without a body, a murder weapon, a motive, an earring, the case never really got off the ground. And then, and you're not gonna believe this shit, Susan Flores countersued the Smarts for harassment and emotional distress on Paul. If that's how we're gonna play it, who's gonna pay for my emotional distress from having to talk about these yahoos? As for more recent updates in the case, in 2016, the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office, in collaboration with the FBI, excavated an area of land near Cal Poly. During this excavation, they found bones as well as other items of interest. The bones were later determined to be animal bones, and the Sheriff's Office called the excavation beneficial, but never released any further statements statement as to what they found. In 2020, the sheriff's office, again in collaboration with the FBI, searched Susan Flores' home in Arroyo Grande and Paul Flores' home in San Pedro. It's never been publicized what exactly prompted the search or if anything important was recovered as a result. Paul Flores was arrested in Los Angeles on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. The sheriff's office notes the arrest was, quote, a result of information obtained during our search warrants last year at the home of Paul Flores as part of the Kristin Smart investigation, unquote. And on March 15th, 2021, the sheriff's office executed a search warrant on Ruben Flores, Paul Flores' father's home in Arroyo Grande. The search included cadaver dogs as well as ground-penetrating radar, but when asked for a comment about their findings, a San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office spokesperson said, quote, the search warrant has been sealed. As a result, we are precluded by law from disclosing any further details regarding it. This is an active and ongoing investigation. The sheriff's office will not be commenting any further and no additional information will be released at this time, unquote. So here we are, to the part of the video where I give you my theory and my opinion. First, let me make a massive disclaimer that anything I say going forward is just a theory. Although Paul Flores is the only suspect or person of interest in this case, he has never been charged in relation to the disappearance of Kristin Smart. And it is important to remember that. If he is somehow innocent, I apologize for alluding to his guilt throughout the entire duration of this video. Please remember that our justice system is supposed to operate under the assumption that suspects or persons of interest are innocent until proven guilty. Although we all know it doesn't always work like that, but that's another video entirely. So, moving on. Also, please note that my opinion and theory isn't groundbreaking. I think it's pretty freaking obvious what happened here. And I think that anyone who has ever looked into this case comes to more or less the same conclusion. But here goes. I do not think Kristin Smart was hammered the night she disappeared. I think it's more likely that maybe she was drugged. Her friends and family consistently report that she was not a heavy drinker, so I think it seems extremely out of character that she would choose to go to this party alone and pick that as the perfect time to begin her binge drinking career. I don't know or even necessarily think it was Paul Flores who may have done this, but I do think it was Paul who tried to take advantage of the opportunity. I think he saw Tim and Cheryl trying to help Kristin, and with that saw an opportunity to finally not be rejected by a girl. That he had every intention of raping Kristin from the moment he saw her with Tim and Cheryl. It would explain why he tried multiple times to get Cheryl to leave the two of them alone, but she wouldn't, so I think Paul took Kristin back to his dorm and tried to take advantage of her there. I think she put up a pretty decent fight, hence the black eye and the scratches, and I think once Paul realized that he had lost control of the situation, he thought the only way to regain control of the situation was to either strangle or bludgeon Kristin. I don't know that he ever had any actual intention to murder her, maybe just to incapacitate her long enough to get her out of his dorm. Intentional or not, I do think Paul killed Kristin in his dorm room before transporting her to his mother's property. Do I think Kristin Smart's life could have been saved past the point that she separated from Cheryl Anderson? No, sadly, I don't. I think Paul murdered Kristin probably within like an hour of parting ways with Cheryl. I don't think the Cal Poly campus police or the San Luis Obispo police acting quicker could have changed the outcome for Kristin specifically. That being said, had they acted quicker or with any damn sense, I think they could have built a solid case against Paul and landed his ass in prison, where if he's guilty, he most certainly belongs. It's been almost 25 years since Kristin Smart disappeared, and although she was legally declared dead on May 25th, 2002, I think it is so incredibly important for her family that her body be recovered and the responsible parties be brought to justice. The only positive thing that I can say came out of this case is the Kristin Smart Campus Safety Act of 1998. This requires universities to contact law enforcement when violent crimes occur on campus. With that, I guess I'm going to wrap it up here. It's hard because when covering unsolved cases, you don't really ever feel like you're at the end. It's more of a guess I'll stop now kind of vibe. If you haven't ever looked into this case on your own, I urge you to do your own research beyond this video. There are a lot of conflicting reports out there pertaining to certain information. I did my best to sift through it all, but don't drag me too hard if I missed something or I gave an account different to something you've read. If there's information that you feel I missed and you would like to share, or if you've read contradicting information that you believe is accurate, please feel free to leave it in the comments down below. But please be nice and be respectful. Remember that when gathering information for these videos, I am one person in a vast sea of information. In regards to me maybe missing something, keep in mind that I intentionally didn't touch on every detail of the case because it's been going on for a quarter of a century and there is so much information out there. And if I tried to cram it all into one video, we'd be here for days. So with that being said, I thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and to listen to Kristin's story. If you haven't already and you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to my channel down below. We just hit 25 subscribers, which I know in the grand scheme of YouTube is a teeny tiny itty bitty little baby bloop of a channel, but I don't really care about that. Just knowing that there is anyone out there that is interested in listening to what I have to say, in my opinion, is pretty dang cool. So if you're new, feel free to join us. I put out new true crime content each week, and I'd love to see you back here in my next video. Until then, stay safe and have a good week. Bye, guys.